Are you wanting to create a highly prosperous photography business doing what you love? Or maybe you have a great business already and want to up your game? Then you're in the right place. Master craftsman photographer Lucy Dumas and her guests are here to support you on your journey. Now here's your hostess and tour guide, Lucy.
You are not good enough. You're just not seeing clearly enough, maybe not trying hard enough, and not trusting yourself enough. That is a quote by Emma Zhu. And before I introduce today's guest, which I'm super excited about, I want to let you know that I have a new and improved website. Woohoo! And I would love to have you visit lucydumascoaching.com and let me know your thoughts. If you find any typos, it's okay to message me on that. And there also is a free guide on this that will help you find your ideal clients. And if you've been listening to my show in the last several weeks, the last couple of months, you will know that I have a series that I've been doing every other week using this 7-step guide as the guide. So you can follow along, download the guide, and then listen to those mini episodes. So let me tell you about the amazing Jeffrey Shaw. He's a photographer, author, speaker, including on the TED Talk stage, and mentor. He's often described as an authority and advocate for self-employed business owners. Jeffrey Shaw is valued for his actionable and in the trenches approach to achieving business and life success. He sold eggs door to door when he was 14 and has a history from that point of self-employment. In his 20s, he built a highly regarded portrait photography business for affluent families, and that continued for 3 decades. He's been featured on the Oprah show, CBS News, in People and O magazines, and is on display at Harvard University. Today, he's the author of Lingo and The Self-Employed Life, host of the Self-Employed Life podcast with nearly 2 million downloads, and founder of Self-Employed Business Institute. He is a LinkedIn learning instructor, contributor to Entrepreneur Magazine, and speaks extensively at associations, groups, and conferences. Phew, is that all? So now on with the show. Okay, here we are with the amazing Jeffrey Shaw. Jeffrey, I want to thank you for being on my show again. I first heard about and met Jeffrey when he spoke at the Professional Photographers of America conference in 2019, I think, 18, 19. And I was so inspired by his talk that I bought his book, Lingo. And then in June, when I decided to have a podcast, the first person that I wanted to be on my show that I didn't already know personally was Jeffrey. So he was episode 15, and here we are, Jeffrey, episode 200, 4 years later. You're still writing more books, and I'm still interviewing wonderful people like you. So thank you for being
Well, that's
willing
good.
to
Congratulations to you on the progression of your show too. And the average podcast lasts like 7 episodes. So
Yes, I know.
You're just busting it up. Good for you.
Yeah. The person that helped me put it together talked all the time about pod fade. And I just made this decision. I'm not going to do pod fade. So whenever I think, should I keep going? I was like, no, don't be a pod fader.
Yeah. Good for you.
So you have a podcast as well.
I do. Yeah. Gosh, and it's in June, it was the 9th year of the podcast.
All
And
right.
we have broadcast just shy of 900 episodes. I've recorded more than that because I'm always recording way ahead. But yeah, it's about 900 episodes over 9 years. And 9 years ago, it felt like the wild, wild west. I don't think any of us knew what we were getting into. And here we are. still
Yeah.
doing it, and it's still going strong,
And
thankfully.
you have a million listeners?
Well, there's been over 2
Not
million
li-
downloads over the
yes.
9 years. But the podcast ranges anywhere between like 23,000 to 30,000
Wow.
listens a month.
Wow.
So yeah, and it's still, and I keep, as we do when we're self-employed or when we're running our own business, right? We expect that we wait for the shoe to drop. So I've always looking at the stats thinking, when are people going to stop listening? Because, we're probably going to talk about my next book being about self-doubt and all that stuff. Like I still have it 40 years in. So I do
Sure.
think sometimes like, when are people going to stop listening? Is this just all a fad? But
Yes.
they keep,
Yeah,
they keep
right.
listening.
True, true. I've got that same thing. Um, so yes. So Jeffrey has a new book that he's writing. How long have you been writing your book, and what's the title?
Yeah, so this will be the third book. And I love talking about it already because I'm actively writing it as we're talking about, which is a very different for me. I've never started talking about a topic so far in advance of a book coming out because the book won't be out till spring of 2025.
Oh no.
So I know we're well in advance, but it's fun to talk about. Let's face it, it's a universal topic. So we can talk about this now. We'll be talking about it in 2050. The topic is self-doubt, but particularly self-doubt for high achievers and how high
Hmm.
achievers encounter self-doubt. Now, the book, tentatively, the working title is Unstoppable. Um, but the topic of it is nature of self-doubt and how that came about, a couple different ways, actually. So I try to look at the writing of my books as kind of an ecosystem because I'm always writing for the same audience. In fact, everything I do, I try to make sure it's the same audience, and it's an audience of business owners, typically self-employed. Um, so, my first book, Lingo, was about brand messaging. My second book, The Self-Employed Life, kind of the whole ecosystem of being self-employed. And I thought, and both books were both very, while there's certainly a lot of personal development and coaching in the book, they're also practical. They're business
Mhm.
strategy books. But when I really thought about in the ecosystem of the lives of self-employed business owners, what did I feel they needed next? Like for the same reader, but their next part of their journey. And self-doubt is what came up to me because I hear it so often from my clients and my students at the Self-Employed Business Institute. Self-doubt comes up. I just had an open coaching call, and one of our students was sharing her recent experience with self-doubt. And then here's just a fantastic question that was asked of me, and I think many of us business owners can ask ourselves. When trying to, I had eight different ideas for the next book. And
Okay.
speaking to a friend of mine, many of your listeners may know Mike Michalowicz. Mike's a good friend of mine, and I called upon him. Mike he wrote Profit First, is one of his many books. Get
Mhm.
Different, Clockwork. I mean, he's just amazing. Um, and I asked him, I reached out to him for his help to decide on the next book, and he had said to me, "Great question for us all to ask ourselves: is what's something everyone encounters but thinks that they're the only one?"
Mm.
Right. And as soon as he asked the question, I was like, self-doubt. I said I had seven other ideas. This was only one of them, but that fit the bill and was really exactly what I wanted to address. So that's how the idea for the next book about. So I said it's actually for the same audience of business owners, um, and yet it will also, I think, appeal to a much broader audience of people who may not be self-employed, but we all face self. Like I said, it's something we all encounter, and we often think we're the only ones. I'm just focusing more on it, how it applies to high achievers, because I think that's particularly fascinating.
Yes. Yes, because how is it that I'm going to include myself in the high achiever?
Mm-hmm.
How is it that self-doubt goes? How has it held me back? How has it actually helped me at times? So, first of all, can you put a framework around what you mean by self-doubt? Is there a definition? I mean, it seems obvious, but maybe you have
Yeah.
a take on it
Um,
that is going to be cool.
yeah, and I don't know that I would say, but again, I love what you're saying. First of all, that uh, the reason, high achievers, it just shows up more. It's interesting, and I think again, it definitely relates to being an entrepreneur and being a business owner. I've always said, I mean, always, I think this is being in business from day one for me, which is 40 years now. I've always said being self-employed is like personal development on steroids,
Absolutely.
right? I mean, when you are a high achiever, self-employed, you are going to you're moving through life faster, harder than your average person. Like you're going to encounter more situations, more challenges. Like everything's just on steroids. You're going through the process of growth and personal development, and the way that you're being called to grow faster because you're exposing yourself so much. So for that reason, and here's what, Lucy, what I think is really fascinating. I started looking in the very early stages of writing the book at what research is out there, because I'd like this book. I originally wanted this book to be a little more scientific backed, more research backed than my previous books, because I tend to be a very conceptual thinker, being a photographer, visionary. But I wanted this book to have a little more science backing to it. But you know what? I couldn't really find any science on the downside of self-doubt. Most of the science that's out there and research that's out there talks about the gifts of self-doubt, which is all well and good. But here's my perspective on it. You try telling a high achiever who's trying to get somewhere in their lives and is right in this moment feeling stuck or challenged by self-doubt, you try to tell them that's a gift.
Right.
Like it feels nothing like a gift.
I'm
right.
afraid.
And I don't know about you, but I'm kind of tired of this schmaltzy approach to things, if that's I think it's a word, Yiddish word. It's I'm kind of tired of this rote things that people say out of habit without understanding, like, what does it feel for those of us with boots on ground?
Right.
And I just think it's actually insulting to just be like, it's here's the upside of doubt. I'm like, yeah, but when I'm trying to accomplish big things in my life and I'm finding myself stuck with self-doubt, or what I'm finding is often the biggest consequence of self-doubt is that people, this is a metaphor, but they dip their toe in the water instead of dive full in. I don't think self-doubt often stops high achievers because they're so used to, like, they're going to plow through. But I do find often it causes people to just dip their toe in the water. They don't show up as big in the world as they could. They're not as bold in the way that they're presenting themselves. For that matter, they may not be marketing themselves as much as they need to because there's some element of doubt. There's fear that they're going to be looked at as being too salesy or too aggressive. So they doubt themselves. But so it may not stop a high achiever, but it without a doubt causes them to slow down or to be what I refer to as the 80% goal. Like 80%, maybe even at the most, 7 to 8% of them is showing up, but not their full 100%.
Right.
Because they've allowed self-doubt to slow them down.
Right. As a business coach, and I think you do coaching. Anyway, yes, you're a coach as well.
100%. That's most of my income is coaching. Yeah.
I have found, and tell me if this is what you notice as well, that people who have so much potential, and I'm just like, okay, get out there, go for that, and then we have our next call and they stall, or they're afraid, or sometimes we've unpacked like why they didn't do something that maybe wasn't even that hard, and they've shared the fear of not being able to do whatever it is, maybe with photography, deciding to I don't know, be a wedding photographer, and the self-doubt that you can actually pull it off can keep you from marketing yourself, or when you get leads, making those calls, because let's face it, self-doubt is fear, right? And and it has surprised me over the 9 or 10 years I've been coaching at how much this has slowed people down from what is huge potential. Yeah. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll point out what I think are three, and this is why I'm gearing the book towards high achievers. I'll point out three kind of main, I think 3 components, but the highlights. one is, and this is really kind of the really turnaround thinking of self-doubt. And actually this, I have to say, I think this is the pitch that got my publisher to publish the book. So I'm publishing with the same publisher as I did my previous book, but there's no guarantee that they're interested in publishing that topic. So you still have to pitch yourself. And what really turned it around for them is when I said that I believe self-doubt is bigger than imposter syndrome.
Mm.
And the publisher was immediately like, whoa, tell me more. Like, I immediately had her attention because, of course, there's a lot of talk about imposter syndrome. It's a big buzz. The reason why I think self-doubt is a bigger challenge than imposter syndrome is that in imposter syndrome, we worry about other people thinking that we're not who they think we are.
Oh, okay.
Right? That's kind of the root of self-doubt, is you're afraid that, oh my gosh, people are going to think I'm a fraud, but actually that's from their perspective, so it's actually all about the other thinking, but yet we collapse in the fear of imposter syndrome, thinking, I'm not all that. People are going to find out I'm a fraud. So we worry about other people finding out, our quote unquote truth, which is why we get challenged with imposter syndrome. Self-doubt, the reason I think it's a bigger issue is that really, if you look at the root of self-doubt, it's you're fearful of finding out yourself that you're not all that. And that hurts more. To me, it's so much more painful to come to the truth of, oh my gosh, I'm not who I think I am. That's why self-doubt, it's a big challenge, because we fear that we might find out that we're not who we are because we can't replicate something we did before. And so that brings me to the next key point about self-doubt. I have a lot of survey go. So I mentioned earlier about trying to make this scientific and research based. And I'm kind of drifting away from that because I'm not finding the research that really supports my own theories. And instead, what I'm doing is I've got a survey that I'm circulating, and any of your listeners can take it. It's called, you can get it at selfdoubtsurvey.com. Would love for everybody to go and take this brief survey, although it's not so brief. You can put as much attention into it as you want. But I'm really now leaning towards writing the book from the perspective of real boots on the ground, in the trenches, real life high achievers, and pulling out of them how they're experiencing self-doubt. My favorite question on the survey is, do you experience self-doubt more often when you're doing something for the first time or doing something you've done before? Overwhelmingly, the response has been, I have more self-doubt when I'm doing something I've done before.
Interesting.
Right. So why would be the reason for that?
Yes.
Sorry, were you gonna make a point?
Oh, so I've found in my lifetime that when I've done something for the first time physically, like the first time I bowled, I got a strike. The first time I threw a dart, I got it a bullseye. And then it's that next time trying to do it again that then, of course, I don't know how to bowl a strike every time. I just didn't know how to not bowl a strike. So anyway, I'm just thinking about that's like a little thing I've noticed. So I think that fits in.
I love that. I'm actually writing this down. He's like, oh my gosh, Lucy just gave me something for the book. I never thought about that. The whole beginner's luck, right? What is the phenomena behind beginner's luck? Why do we well, you know what? Probably the phenomenon, if I get underneath it, is because there's a lack of self-doubt when you're doing something for the first time. So therefore you have this experience of beginner's luck. Thank you for offering that. I mean, that's just brilliant. Sure. Because the reason more people recognize they encounter self-doubt when they're doing something they've done before is because you now have laid expectation on it. And this again is why self-doubt is a bigger challenge for high achieving people, because you achieve, you inherently have expectations for your next level of achievement.
Right.
It's by nature of being a high achiever, you're going to, now you have expectation on your next level of achievement. Once you've introduced expectation, you're going to have more doubt. Okay. The third component of self-doubt that I'm finding that really stands out is how, and this is, I can think of the most practical at the root experience you see when people go through self-doubt, is they've detached from what they know to be true about themselves. When we experience self-doubt, it is amazing to me, particularly amongst high achievers, that they have forgotten what they've highly achieved at before. Right? They have forgotten that they probably have done something similar to this before. They have forgotten that they are brave enough. They've shown bravery in their life before. They have forgotten the fact that they are, in fact, brave enough to be a business owner or to be a high achiever, all of which is evidence that you've nailed this before, and this moment of self-doubt is no big deal. But there's a detachment process that comes from self-doubt, that when I have conversations with people about self-doubt and how they experience it, it's almost as if they have forgotten who they were. There's like a self-doubt amnesia.
Do you think that, because I'm thinking about where it comes from, and so another little story. When I was 7, we took the IQ tests, and they pulled my parents aside. I'm not bragging, but they said Lucy has a very high IQ. Now, I think they made the mistake of telling me, because then my expectation of myself
Right.
was to be a straight A student, which I was not, because my reading, writing, all the things, art, all of those things that are the way my brain works, I got amazing grades. But math, language, even though I'm good at conversational languages, picking up things and accents, the technical part, I did not excel at. Handwriting, I got C minuses in handwriting. So I had a lot of self-doubt at my potential, or about achievement and everything you're talking about, because I was like, oh, I'm supposed to be a straight
You
A
were told you
student.
have a high IQ.
Yeah. And so the
Yeah.
expectation was higher than it should be.
Yeah.
And then that then I was insecure. I mean, I had no idea I would become an entrepreneur. I had no idea what I would do. I just went along with whatever felt right, and things fell into place. But
Yeah, no, it's what you're referring to is the undercurrent, which I'm really looking at. The power of the undercurrent of self-doubt is undoubtedly expectation. Similarly, you can compare it to, if you know the work of Brene Brown,
yes,
which most people are familiar with, her work around vulnerability. But I tell you, the more you know about her work around vulnerability, you're pretty hard pressed to try to discern, is her topic really vulnerability or is it shame? Because they go so hand in hand. And so really, if you look at her work and her amazing body of work, that there's an undercurrent of shame, which is what has caused people to feel like vulnerability is a weakness. Right. So her teachings around vulnerability is not a weakness. Vulnerability is strength. And so, but in order to get that, you have to deal with the shame.
right.
And the same is that in order to, there's this undercurrent of self-doubt around expectation. I think if one were to make a comparison between our work, I think when this book is out, people will see that that expectation is going to go hand in hand with self-doubt in the same way shame goes hand in hand with vulnerability. But you have to deal with the undercurrent. The undercurrent is often the driver for the way it's showing up, and the way it's showing up as a challenge. And that is most definitely what I'm finding, initiated by the survey and the overwhelming response of people that have admitted to feeling self-doubt more when they're doing something they've done before. And the only explanation for that can be that's because you've laid expectations on it.
Right.
I literally have a piece of art in my family room it says expectations are the blueprint for disappointment. Right. I mean, it's something it was given to me as a gift years ago. I actually talk about the story of it in Lingo, because it's a rather dramatic story and how I ended up with this piece of art. But it's a massive print, but very powerful statement that expectations, are set up for disappointment, and they really are. And that's how it connects into self-doubt.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about how expecting to always do things perfectly, never have anyone criticize. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one that 1,000 people can praise something and one person can
One
have
person.
one little thing,
Yeah.
and then you lose sleep at night and wonder, and I'm a loser, and
Yeah.
that there's that expecting myself to be good
Yeah.
at everything rather
Which
than
is why I'm looking at this from the perspective of high achievers, right? That's why
yes.
I'm writing this book for the same audience, like the same people that would have read my book, Lingo, and the self-employed life, business
Yeah.
owners, high achievers. That's why this book, I'm not writing this book for people that are stuck on their couch and aren't going anywhere in their life because they won't get it. But the surprise of success, you could say, and actually that would be another good book.
Ooh,
The surprise of success is the things we think we're leaving behind actually show up louder. And imposter syndrome is one of them, right? I mean, I know many people that as they achieve levels of success, I mean, think about how often people in a management role are promoted to a higher level of management or a higher position and suffer with imposter syndrome because they don't feel qualified for the promotion. They don't feel
mm-hmm.
qualified for the advancement. So there are certain things, certain characteristics. This really started showing up for me. Honestly, years ago, I was a member of a Facebook group that was for speakers, and it was an invitation only group. Pretty tight knit initially. The group grew to a couple hundred members, but it was actually a very tight group, and it was intended to be kind of the water cooler for professional speakers, in that it was the place where you could. I think originally it was kind of thought of like the place you could vent because it's a stressful lifestyle, even more so nowadays being stuck on planes but it was a kind of I thought a place to like where you could really vent. But honestly, what happened was it became, I think, more of a platform where high achieving, very well known authors, people that by first name or a part of this group, or know by names of the authoring books, and what it became really was a place where people really share their vulnerability
Mm.
and share their fears. And I became really intrigued, and I do think it was the root of why I became interested in this topic of self-doubt, is because I watched some of the most successful authors that by name and speakers and very high level people. Behind the scenes, they are experiencing so much self-doubt, experiencing
Mm-hmm.
so much imposter syndrome, feeling so elevated. I mean, they wrote a book because they thought they had something to say, and they thought it was kind of a reclusive lifestyle, which
Mm-hmm.
is what they wanted.
Yeah.
And the book busts open, becomes huge, and now they have a whole other lifestyle to deal with. They're like, I don't even know if I wanted this, but now the book is famous. Now they're famous. And to listen to them deal with the fears and the pains and the self-doubt and how do I ever write another book now? Like, I
Mm.
wrote this book. This book sold millions of copies. Like, what do I do now?
Right. Right.
Very vulnerable. And it really got me intrigued by the correlation between high achieving and the challenges we face that we think we're going to be leaving behind. Because as people aspire to be more and more successful, they think they're going to be shedding a lot of these challenges. And in fact, they get louder. And it doesn't matter if you're the author of a multi-million-dollar best-selling book or a photographer running your business. Like I said right in the beginning, the fact of the matter is, if you're brave enough to have your own business, you are exposing yourself to the world in a way that is likely to push buttons. Either you're an
Mm.
introvert in an extrovert world, or you're an extrovert, but people are very free to criticize. Like there's just exposure because you're in business that can't help but push some buttons that you are
Right.
likely to experience as a high achiever.
Right. And I've seen the superstars in our photography industry, how people like to look for flaws.
Mm-hmm.
And I can just imagine how it feels, because I decided at a certain point not to keep speaking and getting on platforms and traveling around, with PPA. I decided to work in my home and my business. But
Mm-hmm.
I, what am I trying to say?
Well, it's
I can
exposure.
imagine how
Yeah.
difficult it would have been for me to get
Yeah.
the criticism that is bound to come when you're in public and people assign things to someone that maybe like they're not walking on water, they're not perfect, they're just
Right.
people. We all have our strengths, we all have those things that are not so strong. So yeah, when we take risks and get out there in the world and have that self-doubt, that's a tough
Yeah. I think, again,
position.
Brene Brown addresses that beautifully. I saw her years ago, pretty early in her career, speak at a conference in New York City, and she said this on the stage, and it has since become quite common, and people have recited it. What she
Mhm.
said was that, and clearly it was, you could tell she was at a point, again, it was kind of the early rising of her fame, and you could see that she was probably beginning to deal with that. Like she was suddenly, human culture seems to want to build people up and then knock them down.
Right.
So, right, it's a common pattern, and you could see her dealing with the criticism that hurt, and we have to remember that people are humans, and there's a good chance, not everyone, but some people walk around the world with a suit of armor, but most people are humans with human feelings. And she was clearly battling this new experience of being criticized. And I think often she got criticized from within because she's a scientist and a researcher, and that very same audience now is challenging the validity of what she's finding. And
Right.
but what she said, which I think is true for all of us, is she said, "I have learned to not take criticism from anyone not playing life as big as I am."
Mm,
And that has stayed with me because, Lucy, as you're saying, I mean, I have continued to push my career. I've continued to push my exposure in life. I've continued to put myself out there. I'm very vocal on social media. I take on tough challenges and tough topics, and I'm vocal about it. And yeah, I've exposed myself to all sorts of opinions, and misjudgments,
right.
so, and often misjudgments, but I have learned, I've really embraced that. It's like, well, you know what? If you're not playing life as bold as I am, if you're not willing to take as many risks, then I'm sorry, but your perspective is not valid to me. I will listen to my peers, people that are playing life as big as I am, exposing themselves and putting themselves out there equal or higher than I am. I will listen. I will listen to their valuable input. But I'm sorry if if you're not a high achiever, but you think you have an opinion about the keynote I just gave, I'm
Yeah.
not going to take a whole lot of. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks for sharing.
Yes, thank you for sharing.
Okay, so you gave us the components. Number one, self-doubt is bigger than imposter syndrome, which I've
Mm-hmm.
never thought of imposter syndrome as uh, other people's judgment on us. So I guess self-doubt I labeled as imposter syndrome. So I like that separation.
Yep.
Like when I like when I was in high school, I was the yearbook editor and I was down on the field of a football game, and I didn't really realize you need to stay away from the field because the players don't always stay right within the lines.
Right.
And two very handsome young men fell on me and I went flying. And I think most people, the pain would have been the shame and embarrassment. To me, it was just the pain. I ran my nylons, so that I don't know if that totally fits, but I'm someone that is more interested or more taken down by my own inner demons, inner
Mm-hmm.
conversation than the fear of embarrassment. But I know a lot of people,
Yeah.
it's embarrassment. So I'm thinking that possibly married to that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
So self-doubt, number one, is bigger. Um, Number two was often we have more self-doubt when we've already done something and we're doing it again.
Mm-hmm.
Three is when we detach from what we know about ourselves.
Right.
So let's dip into some good news. So how do we deal with self-doubt? How do we, I'm not going to say use it to our advantage, although that could be another conversation.
Yeah.
Like I use self-doubt to never have gotten on a double diamond lift at a ski resort because it's actually self-truth.
Well,
Not
and
self-doubt.
that's a really good. I'm glad that you asked it. First of all, you're not going to make. I mean, we're very the subtitle of the book is currently manage self doubt and live your full potential, right? So I'm referring to it as manage, right? Because it's not about it going away. It's not going
No.
to go away. Um, I love your example of the ski slope, but here's the thing, and it ties into this as well, is that, and this is a chapter in the book as well, that you had said you use self doubt in some way. Um, I think there's also a shift. I don't know if whether it's as we mature in years, or I actually think it's more of a social shift because I don't see it in younger generations than perhaps our generation.
Mm.
And that is a lot of us were driven, again, as high achievers, a lot of us drove ourselves to our current level of achievement through what I refer to as a negative fuel source.
Mm.
Okay, we drove ourselves to the level of achievement that we now sit at, whatever level of achievement that is. If you look at it, it may have been, you know,
Mm.
fear of not being perfect. It could have been, you know, like you said, self-doubt, or in some ways we may have used kind of what I refer to as a negative fuel source. And I am most definitely, you know, for me, the negative fuel source was I never wanted to be caught unprepared. Like that
Mm.
was such a, the thought of being caught unprepared was a paralyzing fear for me, which drove my success in a positive way because I was so concerned about being caught unprepared. I was over prepared for everything. It
Mm.
made me a good photographer. It made me the photographer that always showed up early. My clients never had to worry about me being late. It made me the photographer that, you know, I was never not going to complete an order on time. I wasn't ever going to, everything was always going to be perfect, because I was driven by this fear of being caught unprepared. Okay. So while that, and again, this ties into a pretty classic phrase, a lot of us hear, like, what got you here may not get you to where you want to go. I think this negative fuel source that so many of us were driven by worked really well for us at a period of time doesn't work for us so well now for a number of reasons. One, it's in conflict to your self-care. And we live in a world now, thankfully, where people are putting effort into their self-care, their well-being, and their mental health. There's no way you could be driving your success with a negative fuel source and be benefiting your mental health. You're living on the line of fear of something.
Right.
And I think not only has that, I said, not only do I think that changes and evolves as we mature, I actually think generationally it's different. I don't think generations younger than us are driven as much by negative fuel source. They don't live. I mean, why did we get good grades in school? Because we were afraid of the permanent record.
I know.
Right? There is no permanent record. There is no, I mean, you know, why did we behave? Because we were afraid of authority.
Yes.
You know, generations after us they're not driven by this false sense of authority. They're not driven by this permanent record in school. They have learned just generationally. I think they're driven by what's positive. They're driven by YOLO. You know, you only live once. So they're driven more by a mentality of lived life to its fullest and positively because you only live once. So I think a big part of you know, the shift away from self-doubt is, and the reason we would want to manage it is that there's just no reason to try to drive your success any longer with self-doubt. Instead, let's not see it as a benefit of driving your success, but let's say, let's enable you to be as successful and likely more successful because you've learned to manage it in front of you instead of using it to push you from behind. Because you will get further in your level of achievement. I mean, if you look at the dynamics, the gravitational dynamics between push and pull, you know, it's better to be pulled towards something, right? So you want to be lured by the ability to manage the self-doubt than to try to use it to push you to where you want to go.
So do we have some steps to help us? Because it's not, to me, it's not like, oh, I'm just going to stop doing that. Like I I I
Although
love
that
that
is
you
one of the steps. That's step number one. I will tell
sure.
you that and this is, again, I always say, one of the reasons why I love coaching people I refer to as of a certain age. But it's also who I'm writing my books for. Not that 20-year-olds don't read my books, but I'm writing them for, anyone, high achiever, 30 to 60, 70, I don't know, somewhere in
Hmm.
there. And one of the advantages of working with that folks in that age bracket is the more you mature, the more it is true that you can change your life on a dime. Like,
Right.
the older you get, the more you realize that, man, you can go to PPA's conference imaging and you can hear one speaker say something and boom, it can change your life and career. Right.
Hmm.
I mean, you can just, I love that. That comes with maturity. So honestly, the first step is to shed light on it. And that's my reader's promise. As I prepare to write a book, I do a lot of background work, more inner work. And I ask myself, like, what's the promise of this book?
Okay.
And what's my hope for the book? My hope for the book is that we increase the conversation around self-doubt,
Hmm.
because the promise is that if we talk about it, it will lose its power. It's like
Like,
anything else, right? The more, I love that Leonard Cohen phrase from his book, his song Hallelujah, that it has a crack in it, and that's how the light gets in,
hmm.
right? When you crack something, when we have conversation about self-doubt, it's by nature, it's going to lose its power. So,
So pay
yep, go ahead.
attention to it. Number one.
Yep. Step number one is to just pay attention to it, see it.
Yes.
It'll lose its
Yes.
power.
I love what you said about going on your permanent record, because in my journey, I've come up with some mantras when I find myself at that self doubt place. And one of them is, it's not going on my permanent record.
Yeah, I love that.
And the
Yep.
other is, this really helped me. It's not brain surgery.
Yeah.
But funny, haha, I guess, is I have had brain surgery. And when my doctor told me what was going on, I was so in the habit of that, to calm anxiety when anything was scaring me or making me doubt, that I said, well, it's not brain surgery. And he leans in, he goes, yeah, Lucy,
Yeah,
it
it
is.
is.
So, but
Yeah.
I got through even that. The thing
Yeah.
that was like the mantra of, no, or yeah, anyway. So
Yeah, no,
I
I
love
get
that you
it.
said that,
I
not
love
on the
that. That's, yeah,
permanent
the thing
record.
the tool that you use to calm yourself down when faced with it, you still overcame it,
And it
right?
still
Which says
calms
a
me
lot.
down.
Yeah. Yep. And yeah, so shed
So
light
number
on it
one,
is the
shed the
first
light.
thing, right? Um, Secondly, which I'm going to say in a different order than usual because of what you just said, but second is, I encourage people to have a shutdown phrase, right? You're referring to as a mantra, but you know what? You may need something a little stronger,
Hmm.
right? I mean, my shutdown phrase is shut the F down, right? I mean, I literally just call it out. I mean, you may need something, because that inner voice, those inner critics. And in fact, another component I talk about in the book, and I again just referred to in my group coaching call I had moments ago, was I've given this stuff a name. I call it the soul's gatekeepers. Right, the soul's gatekeepers are the things that are going to show up, literally and just metaphorically, things that are going to show up to challenge you at a moment of growth. Right.
Mm,
I always say it's almost as if we're on this lifelong quest, it seems, particularly high achievers, particularly people that are seekers, visionaries. We are often on a lifelong quest to know ourselves better. Right. It's why we seek out personal development, and we've
right.
chosen to become business owners, which is personal development on steroids. So because of that, in your layers of seeking, every time there's a way in which it's like you're on your way to figure all of life out. You're on your way to figure out what makes you tick. And along the way, it's almost as if your soul says, you're not supposed to entirely figure me out. So
Mm,
as you get closer, you'll find that obstacles show up. Could be self-doubt. It could be imposter syndrome. I've also seen a lot of self-employed business owners leave their job, choose to become self-employed. They're working on building their business, and they get an amazing job offer. and they're taunted. Like, what do I do? Do I go back to where I just came from? I just left employment and now I'm being taunted with a job offer. And I was like, yeah, that's a soul's gatekeeper. What do you want to do with that? Right? Do you want to retreat, or do you want to see it as a test of your commitment to the direction you're going in? All right. So that's why you want to have a mantra to shut that down. So something assertive and strong to just, when that voice shows up, when that soul's gatekeepers, have it sit down and shut up. The third step, what we were referring to earlier, is to reconnect with who you are. It is so common that when people go through moments of self-doubt, they also have this epiphany moment like, oh yeah, why am I worried about this? I mean, the word stupid and self-doubt goes together remarkably often. Like, people will say to me, this is so stupid, but I'm doubting myself. This is so, and they're recognizing that it's stupid because they're like, why am I letting this cause me doubt? I've done other things like it, or I've been brave before. And I mean, I do the same thing. I mean, I'm 40 years in business, and anytime something major comes along, like 9/11, the Great Recession, the pandemic, these things come along that interrupt our lives and our businesses. And even with all my experience, I will sometimes think to myself, oh my gosh, okay, this is it. This is the one that's going to put me under. And you're thinking, really? Like, 40 years of proof that you know how to make it through anything isn't enough to tell you that this instance is not going to do you under, right? But so that's what you also want to do, is kind of reconnect to the stupidity of it and just say, I've got this. I've done something similar. I've shown bravery before. This is not a big deal. And so try to reconnect with your past, I think, will really help you get forward again.
So what if someone hasn't really connected with themselves? How do they begin to do that, to understand?
Just tap back into your experience. I mean, I work with a lot of people that have left their corporate jobs, and unfortunately, I have validated this with other coaches. Most people seem to leave their job 3 years too late. They've had the idea for 3 years, and by the time they finally leave, they're like running out the door. And literally, or metaphorically, you could say running out the door, and that they often like shut the door on that experience. And then they go into business for themselves and they face self-doubt. And I will encourage them. It's like, but wait a minute, you were a high achieving executive in this business that you worked for. Like, you don't think that gives you proof that you can handle this? So even if, it's sometimes, even if it's not always just like this deep personal work that you've done, just look at your resume. Look at a good friend of mine and fellow coach, Mary Rooney, she calls it the value vault. Go into your value vault and look at what you have in there, what you have of value that's always been there. And I think that's a great way of reconnecting. I said, so it's not deep personal work. Sometimes it's just your list of experience, and your resume is more than enough proof to prove to yourself that you've got this thing that you're worried about.
Right. And I'm sure you would agree with me on this, that having someone else like a coach help you look at your value vault, help you reconnect,
Help
or
you
even
reconnect
for the first time with everything you've accomplished. I find that a lot in coaching is having people sharing their self-doubts. And then when I say, well, look at this and look at this and look at this, it's sometimes hard to see it on our own.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
getting support. You would agree with this, yes?
100%. Yeah. Obviously, as a coach, 100%.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I do it, is to help people see themselves when they can't. So yeah. Okay. So I know we have just a little bit of time left. Let me see if I had one other hot question. Well, you answered that one. You answered that one. So I'm just going to ask you two things. Actually, maybe it's 2.5. So I know you have a free gift for us. So what is that, and how do we access that?
Sure. So again, I did mention the self-doubt survey, since our conversation fit into that. The other thing that people can grab, which is really helpful, particularly for your audience of photographers, is the selfemployedassessment.com. So just go to selfemployedassessment.com. And it's a tool that I use for people to be able to see what their strengths and weaknesses are in their business. And it's a custom algorithm, so it doesn't give you just one size, or cookie cutter results. That based on how you answer the questions, it'll direct you as to where you might want to put some attention, whether it's your personal development or your business strategies or daily habits.
Okay. And then the self-doubt survey is under selfdoubtsurvey.com, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And are those accessible through your Jeffrey Shaw website as well?
The assessment is, the survey is not.
Okay.
It just go directly to selfdoubtsurvey.com.
It's in the show notes if someone is driving and can't write it down right now, but they're listening. So my last question is really just giving you the opportunity to either finish up something that you would maybe think, oh, I wish I had shared that piece, or your parting thoughts. So what do you have for us?
Oh my gosh, we talked about so much. I would say parting thoughts is, again, I'm writing this book for high achievers. Acknowledge yourself as such. And what I define as a high achiever is not determined by any level of current success. It's a mindset. People that have it's a mindset. It's a way of being that will lead you to levels of success. But it isn't by no means determined by your sales in your business or anything like that. I see achievement as that way. We all start from somewhere. We all had one blog, one reader of our blog, one listener to our podcast, one reader of our books. We all start from one. So it's not about your current level of achievement, but if you're brave enough to be self-employed, you are by mindset a high achiever.
Thank you. So I want to remind people to stay tuned for my little quick wrap up. And Jeffrey, as expected, it's been just a pleasure. And I wish we could hang out for a couple of days and just talk and learn and support everything that you're doing. And I don't know, now I'm babbling. Anyway, thank you so much. It's just been a joy.
Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.
Okay. I feel so lucky to have such great conversations with amazing authors and photographers. And Jeffrey Shaw is, of course, one of those that I especially enjoy, which doesn't mean I haven't enjoyed every single one of my podcast guests. So let's see if I can have a quick little wrap up. Oh, but before I do, remember to check out my new look of LucyDumasCoaching.com, Lucy with an I, and to grab my book, The 7-Step Guide to Finding Ideal Clients, and listening to my mini course on this podcast that's running every other week for at least 5. I don't need to do all 7 one at a time. Anywho, I'm babbling now, but so topic was on self-doubt, and I thought that was just a really rich exploration with lots of nuances. He talked about where it came from. He said, let's see, his goal for his book is to explore self-doubt for high achievers. And he says that self-employed people and high achievers encounter more challenges, but we're doing them faster. And so then we're growing fast. And he says one of the consequences when we let self-doubt be in charge is we dip a toe in and we don't dive right in. Correcting that, we don't dive right in. It slows us down and our goals end up to being smaller if we're letting self-doubt impact us. So he said there's 3 components. 1, self-doubt is not the same as imposter syndrome. Self-doubt is the inner challenge. He found that self-doubt comes more often when we're doing something again, rather than when we've done it for the first time. And I didn't say this, but ignorance is bliss. I guess there's a reason for that. And we detach from what we know to be true about ourselves. That's the challenge of self-doubt, is not remembering what we've done in the past. There's an undercurrent of self-expectation and shame and vulnerability. And we then talked about how we manage it. And he said, a lot of time it is driven from a negative fuel source, like the fear of not being perfect. So one of the things we can do to help not let self-doubt have control is, number one, to shed light on it, to look at it, to air it out, to pay attention to it. Two is to have what he calls a shutdown phrase. And three is to take that time to reconnect with ourselves and look at what he calls our value vault. And we discussed that, of course, having a coach can help us with all of that. And I would love, if you feel like, gosh, Lucy, I think you could really help me, just go to that new website, click on 20-minute call, and we can just chat and I can give you some support. No obligation. I'm not pushy. I don't have room for thousands of coaching clients right now, but I have all the room in the world to help you in your success in whatever way I can. So, and his parting thought was to always be acknowledging ourselves, that being a high achiever is a mindset, not actually like we don't have to be the richest or the best or the most successful, but having that achievement mindset is where it all starts. So thanks again so much for listening, and love to hear from you. I know I already said that. And until next time, bye.
You have been listening to The Highly Profitable Photographer with Lucy Dumas. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please rate, subscribe, review, and share. To connect one-on-one and learn more about our coaching programs, just go to lucydumascoaching.com. Until next time, go have fun photographing and selling your work.